Morning, Nalin.
Morning, we're live.
Morning, Janet. Are you back?
Five minutes countdown starts now. Four minutes left. Three minutes left. Two minutes left. One minute left. seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 minutes countdown.
Jan, you're live.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending this webinar. And we're hoping to share some really great knowledge with you about speech analytics, business intelligence, and governance. Without further ado, I'm not going to spend a lot of time giving long CVs about everybody. If you would like to find out more about the guest speakers, please feel free to go and have a look on LinkedIn and see who they are and see what we're about. And there you'll get a lot more information instead of me harping on this morning with all the credentials, because today we really want to impart some really great knowledge base thinking. So this morning we have myself. I'm Janet Sutadantu. I'm one of the co-founding members of a company called ScopServ Integrated Services and Colego. And my passion is contact centers. And I'm hoping to share with you today and impart some great thought leadership around the benefits of speech analytics in South Africa. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Okay, then we have Ben van Coller, who comes with a wealth of experience and knowledge. He will be sharing with us on thought leadership around governance. And then we have Corrie Springett, also with 25 years of experience in business intelligence and business analytics. So without further ado, I also just want to do a special thanks to Rod Jones. I see he's joined us today for allowing us to use his ebook on speech analytics for South African contact centers. And that's where I've got a lot of my information from, or the majority of my information that I'm going to be sharing today. So thank you, Rod. Okay, so speech analytics today is business intelligent, and it's a game changer in the market today. Any organization with a modern contact center and call recording capabilities has access to potentially hundreds and thousands, if not millions of hours of customer conversations. In some recent developments in technology, especially around speech analytics, it's been made affordable, which historically was not affordable, and only your huge, massive contact centers could afford this kind of thing. So the speech analytics can be done not in just South Africa, but anywhere in the world. It has become incredibly easy to use, as easy as Google search, allowing anybody to gain value from it without significant hours and hours of training and costs around that. So before expanding in a little bit more detail about the specific benefits derived from the use of speech analytics, it's worth actually highlighting a few of the widely recognized headline statistics. Typically, companies that implement speech analytics experience significant measurable around successes. So for example, the reduction in the call average handling time, you're looking at between 15% to 25%. Reduction in customer churn, depending on the vertical involved. And there you're looking at between 10 to 15%. An increase in first contact resolution, you're looking at 30% and plus. An increase in employee satisfaction, you're looking at, again, a 30% plus. And then lastly, an increase in customer satisfaction, you're looking again at a 30% and plus. So in the case of collections and sales, you're looking at a minimum of 10%, which can be expected. Similarly, cost reductions in the region of 10 to 15% can be realistically anticipated. The individual benefits are discussed more in detail further down in my conversation with you today. But it's notable that most of these benefits have, number one, cost saving, number two, revenue generation, three, efficiency improvement, and then lastly, the compliance characteristics. So speech analytics can provide many attractive and valuable business benefits to most customer-centric organizations. Business intelligence can be used to deliver significant benefit in four primary focus areas. That's the direct cost saving driven by operational efficiencies, revenue generation, including all aspects of customer experience, sales, loyalty, customer retention, lifetime value, and so forth. And then obviously compliance. And in addition to this, speech analytics can be used by your management teams to fully understand what drives many of the typical agent-related contact center KPIs, which is a big thing that we all drive towards in any business, in actual fact. So some of the leading industry analyst firms from the contact center industry, they highlight 8 primary cost-saving benefits directly related to the appropriate use of speech analytics. And I'm going to quickly run through them. And that's a reduction in call volumes after understanding and addressing the reason for customers' calls, the reduction in cost of unnecessary callbacks after improving the first call resolution rates, avoidance of live chats that can be handled rather by IVR and website self-service offerings, a reduction in headcount from automation of call monitoring and compliance checking, which is a big thing. We need to be compliant. Reduce costs of quality assurance and monitoring, avoidance of fines and penalties for damages of non-compliance in heavily regulated industries or certain BPO contracts. Then, of course, the last two is lowering the cost per call through a shortened handle time, so your average handle time, and fewer transfers. And then the last one is to lower new staff, bringing on of staff and pushing up those rates, which obviously we're trying to all reduce costs through early identification of specific training requirements. So for the most contact center operators, both captive and BPO, revenue generation is a core feature of the business model. Whilst customer experience and loyalty and retention and satisfaction are equally important, particularly when evaluating new, untried technologies, revenue generation rises to the fore in terms of measurable priorities. So 3 areas for increased revenues is sales through service, promoting customer loyalty and retention, and identifying your upsell and cross-sell opportunities. So most astute contact center executives will agree that virtually every customer interaction is an opportunity to generate incremental revenues or to preserve or enhance the prospect on ensuring long-term sustainable revenues through loyalty and retention. And I think that's what we're all trying to attain. I'm sure you'll all be in agreement with that. So using speech analytics to build a library of words and phrases that identify possible or successful customer interactions or even failed interactions provide the organization with powerful insights and strong guidelines for the development and implementation of refined revenue oriented customer engagements, strategies, and practices. So for most organizations, the cost of acquiring new customers can be as high as 8 to 10 times the cost of retaining existing customers. It follows that often customer retention can mean the difference between a profit or a loss. So speech analytics provides management with extremely valuable insights that can dramatically reduce the number of customers at risk of defecting, or even and this can be done in real time by accurately predicting whether customers express a dissatisfaction which will then obviously lead into churn. So consider that a typical inbound contact center agent can potentially handle between 18,000 to 25,000 meaningful customer interactions in a year, depending on the type of contact center operation that you run. And this represents huge opportunity, of course, to generate significant revenues through the upsell and cross-selling process. And I think we all want that, right? Particularly in sales-focused contact centers, using speech analytics to analyze historical calls to identify both buying and rejection triggers will provide your management team with powerful strategic and tactical guidelines in respect to product or service offerings relative to the specific customer segments or the call interaction types. And if we all want to hear the voice of the customer, right? So many, due to having limited financial or human resource challenges, many contact centers are only able to pay what I would term lip service to the concept of the voice of the customer. So those are programs running, and they claim that the operation gathers enough information, insights from both unsolicited and solicited sources. Solicited sources can typically be your post-call IVR questionnaires, and unsolicited sources being insights extracted from call monitoring and all the typical reports that contact centers are running, made during the quality assurance process. So typically the average contact center will only monitor and carry out the assessments of between 2% and 4% of their calls. Yet we need to ask, what far-reaching strategic practical decisions are being based on this minuscule level of sampling? How different is it when speech analytics is used to monitor, assess 100% of calls in and out of the contact center, both from what customers are saying and, of equal importance, what the agents are not saying? So the only reliable way to identify calls with negative customer sentiments is to listen to 100% of the calls. In this case, this is where speech analytics is deployed and very useful. The technologies can identify the keywords, phrases, and even the acoustic qualities of both sides of the conversation to determine when the call is deteriorating. And that's what we all want. Automatically triggered by these call events, the identification calls can be used to guide the agreed alternative wording, tone, style, or introduce alternative scripts in order to receive the relationship to deliver a significantly improved customer experience. And the acronym we all know is that is CX, or UX for user experience. There are very little debates, and we all know that for monitoring of contact centers, the first contact resolution, or FCR, possibly is the most watched and most important operational metric used. So improving the FCR rate by providing fast, satisfactory solutions to customers, problems or queries within their first call significantly increases the cost of providing the service or solution. Secondly, additional calls will have a substantial influence in the lowering of customer satisfaction and consequently reduced loyalty and spend, not to mention negatively impacting the service levels. So it is widely recognized that the average handling time is one of the key metrics from an operational and productive perspective for contact center capacity and planning. In a nutshell, your average handle time tells us precisely the amount of time an agent is working on or committed to an identifiable task or work item. Based on this data, we have the ability to accurately plan for the capacity to meet or surpass the customer service expectations and maintain the operations prescribed to the service levels to drive improved productivity. Now, one thing we need to watch out for is what I would call the tomfoolery or the shenanigans, as Rod Jones would like to put it, is that contact center agents can come up with the most amazing ways to, if I can put it in inverted commas, jipper the systems. I've got a list of 9, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing a little series on speech analytics, which I'll go into a lot more detail, but just over here. And from a time perspective, I don't have time to go through all of them, but I think you all know that there are many ways that agents will try and jipper the systems. So improving monitoring and identifying compliance and risk issues, contact centers are coming into increasingly significantly more pressure from regulators and other bodies to ensure maintenance and compliance with appropriate regulations and standards of behavior, specific processes and prescribed practices that need to be followed. Here, speech analytics, again, provides a cost-effective way to provide managers with appropriate insights of 100% of all calls to ensure that agents perform according to those requirements and expectations. Especially in high regulated industries such as banking, insurance, collections, and other financial services, call center agents must meticulously adhere to approved scripts. Using the speech analytics, managers can automatically mine all the calls to ensure that agents are following specific approved processing procedures and making the correct compliance statements, which is critical. What's more is speech analytics will also identify when compulsory compliance statements are not made or incomplete. Then very often agents are under considerable amounts of pressure to meet defined productivity goals or other efficiency-based KPIs. This kind of pressure will often result in the high percentage of non-compliant calls, where, for example, agents fail to make certain disclosures or certain compliance statements. The general practice of assessing randomly selected calls can result in vast numbers of non-compliant calls slipping through the cracks and placing the contact center and the organization at great risk. An appropriate, again, speech analytics solution can automatically check every single inbound or outbound call against specific compliance criteria. So utilizing speech analytics 100% call monitoring allows team leaders or supervisors to easily categorize the type and quickly identify poor and acceptable behaviors to the true insights, and therefore the ability to intervene with inappropriated, targeted correctional coaching, training, and other interventions. This obviously applies to both new recruits and to agents with a long tenure. So typically the QA function evaluates small numbers, typically well under 5% of the total call volume of most randomly selected calls, and measuring, for example, did the agent greet the customer properly? How courteous or professional was the agent during the duration of the call? Did the agent validate and confirm captured key customer data during the intervention? Was the customer provided with the correct information in an efficient and friendly manner? And again, speech analytics can quickly change the paradigm by focusing on driving the majority and not the exception. In other words, using speech analytics insights based on 100% of call assessments versus what I've just spoken about. It easily takes 3 to 4 times for the average call duration for a quality analyst to carry out an accurate call assessment, score or rate the individual sections of the call, and then complete the process by adding coaching or training notes. Speech analytics allows more efficient use of the QA resources by allowing short lists of likely low-scoring calls by automatically extracting to dramatically increase efficiency and reduce focus only on the high or the poor quality calls. The coverage of QA is significantly increased compared to random selection. Quality assessments can fully be automated to a large extent. So at the very heart, not say all, but at the very heart and soul of any effective and efficient contact center are the operators and the processes. In many cases, these processes are not only the drivers for delivering outstanding customer service experiences, but they also constitute the important element of the organization's overall value proposition. It therefore stands to reason that process should be clearly identified, exceptionally well documented, and reviewed and re-engineered on a regular basis. So by skillfully using speech analytics, the operation will be able to carefully mine every call for vast amounts of incredibly valuable metadata. This adds considerably to the context of many of the KPIs and significantly enhances the quality of the business intelligence that the contact center can utilize to drive its own performance and give substance to the organization. Analysis of vast numbers of historical calls, current calls, or interaction recording will highlight many previously what I would call invisible insights and provide management with the ability to identify critical areas in the operation and agent performance, such as flaws in the processes, behavioral issues, or weaknesses in products, services, and distribution channels. Interventions designed to counter these types of issues give rise to and for more astute capacity planning and consequently infinitely better control over the service level in general. So everybody wants to know about return on investment, right? That's any company, no matter who you are. So how speech analytics will directly and measurably benefit the individual organizations will naturally vary from one operation to another and will essentially be driven by how cost saving and revenue generation strategies and tactics are deployed. So without saying too much, with at least one of the currently available solutions in South Africa and developed in South Africa for speech analytics, solutions are surprisingly fast return on investment and an efficient contact center, or let's rather repeat that again, an inefficient, not efficient, an inefficient contact center, we all know is a toxic contact center. And it is much to do with contact center cultures. So toxic contact centers have exceptionally high staff turnovers, poor customer satisfaction metrics, high costs, minimal executive support, and highly disengaged, unhappy workforces. In the hands of a skilled and experienced manager, speech analytics can be used to remold the contact center culture and craft for more efficient and effective processes and practices. In today's fast-moving digital economy, organizations need to be incredibly agile to be able to respond to the changing market conditions, to the competitive landscape, and to social economic realities. Not even to mention the recent need over the last almost 2 years now, work from home strategy, which nobody was really prepared for. So agility represents success or even survival of the products, the brands, the service, and even the company. So speech analytics in today's well-proven method of rapidly obtaining data that can both be quantifiable and vastly less costly than conventional market research. This is all attainable with speech analytics. So in closing, 2020, many South Africans, or many South African contact centers, let me repeat that, flocked to speech analytics to help navigate through the change during these very uncertain times. And then in 2021, contact center technology trends reporting shows that only 37% of contact centers in South Africa are not currently using or considering speech analytics. And since there is such a small to very little, I'm going to use the word flippantly, very negligible cost to getting it going for a period of 3 months, it's a bit of a no-brainer, so that you can decide for yourself whether it will change your world and give you the competitive edge that your BPO or your contact center needs, and that the things that you are looking for. That is me in closing, and I hope that this has benefited you and that you would consider looking at speech analytics as a massive and huge value add to your business. So from here, I would just like to open up to the panel, if I may, and introduce, I already started off with Ben van Coller and Corrie Springett, and just open up the panel to questions. And Ben, if you want to maybe speak on the governance side.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Janet, for that introduction. I think with Poppy being introduced about a year ago, and everyone has been in that journey. With the introduction of speech analytics, there's probably a question in terms of how does my governance change? Is it different if I actually go on to this journey compared to my traditional contact center environments itself? And maybe just by leading just into the conversation, and then I'm going to maybe put the question to either Janet or Corrie. I think from a Poppy perspective, the glasses are always put on in terms of looking at the governance problem when it comes to a contact center, is really going back to the 8 conditions as the Poppy Act described itself. The things that I'm talking about, the condition 1, I talk about accountability, processing, limitation, and those of you that heard those words, those are the section I'm talking about. But then there's specifically 2 points I just want to drill into. Poppy actually asked that we need to have much more better quality of information, accuracy around that. And also is a question around how do we secure and make sure our data is secure in that context. And I think it's obvious, just listening to Janet and understanding how speech analytics work, it actually creates that funnel. You know, it helps with that first contact resolution process, and it actually automates a process. So immediately there is automatic benefit from an information quality perspective, you know, that happens. And if you then also from an electronic perspective, set it up, you already also got enhanced security because there's less fingers into that process, so to speak. So that's maybe my general lead on that. But I would like to maybe just ask Corrie from a specialist perspective, you know, what's a typical security characteristics, you know, that speech analytics offer compared to a normal traditional contact center? Or Janet, you can also come in. That's my question.
That's a great question. Just from our side, good morning to all the attendees. Thank you for the time. Security is obviously paramount to everyone, and I can only speak from a Corby perspective, is obviously as part of the process is the client's got to share their call recordings with the platform. So things like data at rest, data in transit being encrypted is now entry level and par for the course. So we support that completely, as well as fully controlled access environments. So the data from our perspective, every possible measure is taken to ensure that it's that it's secure, and it's kept in an encrypted and secure environment. But the second point, your conversation earlier around the POPIA compliance is, you know, the ability to, and Janet touched on it right in the beginning, is speech analytics does a whole lot of things, and it can look and listen to every call, which is basically the value proposition. But to me, and having done this now for 8 years, the value proposition in my mind has changed a little bit. It's the ability to track and trend over time behaviors that are meaningful to your contact center, and if done correctly, will make a difference to your business. In other words, good agent behavior, is that improving? Bad agent behavior, is that decreasing? And the ability to monitor that and the effectiveness of the interventions. POPIA plays a big one. Are the agents covering the POPIA clauses within each call? Which agents are doing better? But it's a measure you want to ideally get to 100% of your calls. that ability to monitor it and see how effective the intervention is the bottom line, sort of payoff from speech analytics. Yes, it'll reduce your costs. Yes, it'll improve your sales. But those are all byproducts of being able to monitor best practices and being able to see how closely you can get to those from every agent on every call perspective. Janet, I don't know if you want to add to it. I see there's a whole lot of questions on the panel discussion. We'll get to right at the end, I assume.
Yes, because I see there's some great questions coming through. Pumudzo, thank you for your question. Corey, I don't really want to add anything there, but I'm not sure. Do we want to maybe head into the Q&A? Because there's some really, really fantastic questions coming through here. I like this one from Pumudzo. How will speech analytics work on the South African language calls? And I love that question, actually, because we do address that area.
Janet, you want me to grab that one? That's
Please.
a fantastic question for the simple reason South African English is not British or American or some hybrid international English. As Corby, we spent the last 15 years and many millions of rands to develop our own transcription engine for the simple reason that the international products are not accurate enough from a South African context. But more importantly, and I didn't see the question come out in any of the panels, is we also support additional South African languages, those being Afrikaans, Zulu, and Sotho. So, the ability to support the additional vernacular languages is unique to us. But more importantly, because I often get the question in conversations with prospects, is this one thing to say we can support these languages, but every agent does not speak one language. It's best practice to do the compliance phrases in English and the negotiation in the mother tongue, which creates a conundrum for the American products because you can only transcribe a portion of the conversation. From a Corby perspective, we have unique technology that we've created that will transcribe a call as spoken. So if the speaker, the agent, or the client switches languages, we will switch transcription languages as well and dynamically transcribe that call in any of the 4 supported languages. Good question.
Okay, and then there was another lovely one, more of a statement here from Ashika. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, that we are from the Ignition Group and we are using AI for QA purposes. It doesn't replace the QA process. However, it reduces the time spent on the QA call listening and results in higher productivity. And that's 100% correct a statement. And that's what I covered. I don't know if there's maybe a question around that, or was that just a statement? Ashika, I don't know if you maybe want to just share that.
Maybe just from my side, Janet, is, QA as a general sort of comment is QA is only one of a number of use cases supported in speech analytics. Yes, you can automate a whole number of the metrics you currently tracking on your scorecard. Not all of them. If it's subjective, you obviously can't build queries to do that. But it fundamentally, and this is the key part about it, is it fundamentally changes how you do QA, not from a random sample-based process, but to an exception-based process. In other words, I only want to look at the calls that are failing my checks to understand why they are failing. How do I address the behaviors that are coming through in these failed calls and rectify them? And that is, for years, we've done the, take 5 calls per agent, and it's like sticking your hand in the proverbial haystack. And if you pull out a handful of hay, that's great, there are no problems. If you pull out a handful of needles, you're never quite sure how you quantify, is that systemic, is that a once-off? Where the ability, and again, track a trend 90% of the calls over time, the ability to say this was a once-off event and you can quantify it, or this is something that happens on 30% of this particular agent or this team's calls, and you know how to build the intervention. So your QA process changes from being random sample-based, which is by nature bias-driven, to being exception-driven, where you are only looking at the calls that fail the processes that you're checking and then addressing those. It's far more efficient, it's far more cost-effective, but more importantly, it is far better.
And that's what I've covered there. So thank you for reiterating that, Corey. There's a fantastic question that's come through from Bongani Malebe. Thank you so much, Bongani. The question is real-time speech analytics possible and with what accuracy levels in transcription. And I think we've already kind of covered that, but maybe if you could just go through that yet again.
We will. I'm going to park the real time till the end. From a global accepted best practices perspective, 70% transcription accuracy is the benchmark. So why 70%? There's a number of factors that influence how well audio gets transcribed, and we'll cover a couple of them so it'll give some context. For instance, how well does the agent pronounce his words? How heavily compressed are the audio files? How noisy is the contact center? What quality are the headsets? Do you record in mono or stereo? If we look at the benchmark being created across all of the international products, in other words, the best of breed products, typically they're all around the 68 to 72% mark. From a Colby perspective, because we were specifically built for the South African languages, our accuracy rate is between 75 and 85%. So we're well above the accepted norm. But more importantly, it's not just about transcription accuracy, it's also about query accuracy. So what we have for each of our clients is their target for query accuracy is 90% plus, because you can cater for transcription errors and mispronounced words in your query. And I'm going to give an example. So let's say, and this is a real world example, I'm not going to mention the region because it'll be quite apparent who the client is, but this particular client is a debt collector. And one of the checks they have is, did the agent ask the client for the ID number? So in other words, the query would say, was ID number present on the agent side of the conversation? But sometimes when the agent pronounces the word ID, it sounds like me. So it's easy. I can build a query saying, I'm looking for all calls where the phrase ID number is present or the phrase me number is present. I can get 100% accuracy from a query perspective. The second part of that question was around real time. The short answer is real time is not a function of Colby. Real time is a function of the infrastructure to say, how quickly can you offload your call recordings? How quickly can you upload those call recordings? But the key question is, in real time sometimes feels like a tick in the boxes. If you know now that the agent has misbehaved, you have the manpower and the ability to intervene in real time? And the answer normally is no. So post-event, again, remember, it's about tracking and trending over time to change and influence behaviors. That is the key benefit of speech analytics, not the once-off where PT on the contact center suddenly dropped a swear word on the client, and being able to say who can then stand up and interject in the call. Because as you said rightfully at the beginning, contact centers are under pressure from an efficiency drive, and they don't necessarily have staff sitting around waiting for the one black swan event to go, oh, I'm going to drop into that call. And I'm actually not taking any calls because all I'm doing is I'm dropping into calls. It doesn't happen in real life.
Okay. So there was a lovely question as well that came through, and I know we've covered this already, but if we can just address each question that's come through. Thank you, Mark Morris. Love your question as well. Will this replace the QA process?
No, it changes the QA process. Remember,
Correct.
You will always have QAs because you will always need, you never move away from not listening to calls. But what happens is now you can automate listening to 100% of the calls, and you're only dealing with what is the exception. So that's the first aspect of how that QA process morphs and changes over time. The second aspect of it is you will still need to do the intervention. So in other words, and this is a misconception that, insight without action is merely interesting. And it's a key concept with anything in life, is specifically in the context. And if you know something is happening, you have to have an intervention to change that behavior. So your QAs is typically that behavior agent. So they can say, right, I can see Janet is not covering the compliance script in this element. In other words, let's say there's a cooling off period, she misses that consistently. So then I will pick some of the calls that Janet had and coach the agent on that by listening to the calls and say, Janet, this is the area in the compliance script that you have to focus on. And I can monitor to see how you change that behavior over time. But it is key. It's the ability to identify the issue, the insight, but more importantly, your QA agents become the action element of it, to say insight without action is interesting, insight with action is change.
All Right. I am just doing a quick scan to make sure we are addressing everybody's questions. Just give me 1 second. Right. Again, there's a lovely one here. Okay, from Promise. Pamutso, I'm going to take your question offline because I know you are obviously using our solution. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take that one offline to share with you the quality process and how we automate that using the speech analytics software. Okay. Promise, how do you get to automate QA evaluation, but still keeping QA evaluations in place just to compare scores as well?
So initially, it's a great question. And I saw it pop up there and I had to think about how to answer this in a different way. But ideally in the early days, remember you can, within Colby, you have a mechanism to track exactly how accurately the query performs. So you move away from that constant, is the machine performing as well as the human? And in most cases, it will perform as good, if not better. So in the beginning, you might do it as part of a pilot phase. It's just to say, how do I stack up? Because we're all skeptical of technology. Over time, it moves away from comparing scores to just monitoring how accurately your queries are performing. So you can ensure that your query accuracy is always as high as you can get. So let's give a practical example. If you are currently QAing 5% of the calls, you're missing 95% of the interesting insights in the contact center. By using speech analytics, if you're QAing 100% of your calls and you get a 95% query accuracy, it means you're only missing 5% of the calls that you might want to intervention and listen to because those are the ones failing. So that is, again, how that process morphs is you're looking at the exceptions, what didn't pass the checks I have, and then focusing on those. So you might do comparisons in the early days just to validate the technology, but thereafter the query engine will show you its accuracy rate automatically so that you can then enhance that over time.
Thank you, Corey. That was well answered. I've just spotted another one from Ashok Naidu. I hope I'm pronouncing all these names. I'm literally going on the fly here, so please throw a virtual stone at me if I'm getting this incorrect. I do apologize. I also get funny pronunciations of my name. Okay, there's somebody that asked, how are call centers getting qualified leads nowadays? Traditionally, cold calling people via the SWBD is gone. And it's going to, just by the way, because we're dealing a lot with internationals. Okay, we deal a lot in the UK as well, and they're not even allowed to do predictive dialing anymore.
I love the question. Thinking out the box, you know, the concept of cross-sell and upsell becomes fundamentally critical to sales organizations. In other words, how many of the agents, if I phone Janet saying, Janet, if you like the, you know, you've got our product, is there any of your family members you want to recommend us to? Is there any of your friends you want to recommend us to? You know, speech analytics is key, becomes even more important because which of the agents are asking the following questions to help get referral leads, which are not cold, versus, you know, not asking this. So those little tidbits that you're now monitoring for behaviors that you need to change, there are ways and means around it by asking for referrals as an example of it, but which agents do, which agents don't, and how consistently are they doing it? So that is a great use case for speech analytics.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Ashika, for your statement, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with Mark. That's great. This is what this forum is about. It is purely about sharing knowledge and helping one another with where contact centers are going into the future. So Promise, again, back to you. I'm not sure if I missed this, but you saying that that you've already implemented a speech and analytics function. How would you build a report, because it gives a score based on phrase that we consider as positive or negative? Corey, I'm not sure if you can help me there.
Promise, a good question. So in the early days, and and being in IT, the early days, beginning of last year, we had that problem. We solved it by being able to mimic your scorecard. So you can create a scorecard with weightings on it to say for each agent, for each of the categories that you're monitoring, how did they perform as a whole, and then obviously drill down into the detail, so that you then start mirroring how a scorecard would look. So I can have a scorecard for Janet to say, right, Janet does the introduction properly, she does the sort of benefit statement so-so, and she misses these elements of the compliance statement, and those are the ones you want to focus on. But there's a bigger underlying question around this, and again, it's about metamorphosis, is the ability to be able to quantifiably track and trend many things, specifically behavior-driven in the contact center and in the conversations, means that over time, contact center KPIs evolve. So in other words, currently KPIs are very generic and very high level: average handle time, number of calls, number of successful calls, maybe NPS score. But those don't reflect the behaviors that we want to drive from a, let's say, revenue or cost saving perspective. So let's use the example I had earlier. Let's say I have a KPI that in 80% of her sales calls, Janet has to mention cross-sell and upsell triggers and has to validate that. That is not a KPI that's traditional to the contact center, but it's a KPI that fundamentally drives new revenue for the business. So you can create these new KPIs and use speech analytics to populate them to say, what are the other measures in the conversation that makes a difference? So it moves away from QA being a tick box, the agent does it or doesn't it, to being fundamental to the remuneration structure of an organization, to say, we are remunerating our agents on the behavior we want them to display on every call, rather than, you know, on metrics around how many calls, what was the quality of those calls, well, we're never sure. And 5% QA is never going to give you an accurate example of how quality is driven through the organization from a behavior perspective.
Ashok, thank you so much for confirming that my pronunciation was correct. I'm quite proud of myself. Okay, Rod, I see that you have created, well, I know you have, sorry, I'm just repeating what you're writing in the chat here, 3 ebooks, and they're for free with a sign-up form, so you can pass that on to us and to the attendees that are here today. And I see, yeah, there we go. Let's just see, have I missed anybody else? Nolene or somebody, if you could just maybe help me to check that I've covered everybody. Are there any other questions? Because I see we're heading to almost an hour now, and I really wanted to keep this just nice, short and sweet. Any further contact from here on what we do and how we do it, we can chat through other mediums and not on this forum. Today was really just to create some thought leadership and share our knowledge of what's happening in the contact center industry around the speech analytics solution.
Maybe Janet, if I can hop in here with, you made a statement right in the beginning that your passion is obviously contact centers. Mine is the ability that every contact center should have speech analytics. But let's go back pre-Corby days, which is basically pre-COVID, and just chat about what the market looked like then and what the market looked like now.
Thank you, Corey.
Pre-2019, there was only 15, maybe 16 commercial deployments of speech analytics in South Africa. They were typically the international products that carried massive price tags. Corby in the last 18 months has deployed close on 60 contact centers in South Africa alone. So that means that now the market is massively proven from a technology perspective, but more importantly, so many more contact centers are getting the benefit of speech analytics. So much so that in certain industries, for instance, like debt collection, if you are not using speech analytics, you're in a disadvantage to your peers who are using speech analytics. And we're going to see more and more of that. We've seen a tender recently from a big government institution that made reference to, as a contact center provider, you have to have speech analytics. It's the only way you can quantify what is happening on the calls. The other way is too expensive, or it's inefficient when you're only looking at 2 to 5% coverage. So we are seeing more and more of this. And from a Corby perspective, it was a fortunate timing to be in the marketplace when that whole mindset is shifting. But more importantly, be in the mindset, being in the market at the correct price for the South African market. Janet touched on before. Historically, contact centers of 500 agents plus were maybe in a position to afford the international product. From a call B perspective, if you've got 5 agents and more, you can afford call B. It is that cost effective to get into speech analytics now.
And I think that's what I touched on when I opened up, is that for the first time in South Africa, and let's talk Africa, everybody can use this, and it adds such incredible value on the topics that I covered.
Perfect.
All right, so we literally have 10 minutes left. Ben, do you want to talk, say anything more about the governance side?
Maybe just more some questions around this. Typically, would these solutions be hosted on site, or would it be cloud-based? Corey or Janet, what's your general approach? And then, if I want to expand my business, my reach, maybe into African countries, or maybe a Europe company, which I can serve in the same time zone, then obviously from a governance side is, I think with the POPI Act itself, we, as GDPR put it, you become a trusted organized or region, you know, from that perspective. But just typically, Corey, what is the hosting environments, and then maybe we can talk about the governance around that.
So Ben, that's a lovely question, and I think everybody's heading cloud. I don't know who's doing on-premise anymore, but Corey, I'd love you to answer that, please.
So we're a cloud native organization. We were born in the cloud. Just a general comment around cloud versus on-prem is the challenge of speech analytics and the volumes, especially when you're a large organization. And the reason why some of the international solutions are so prohibitive is the hardware required to do on-site processing, because you cater for peak volume and then you have downtime, which is just unused volume. So as Corby, we made the decision to be cloud-based, so we can scale flexibly, and the clients only pay for the processing. We can bake that into the price, so you don't have to build this massive environment per client. From a hosting perspective, we host currently, and I'll chat around some of our expansion plans. We are currently hosted out of 3 geographical regions, AWS and Ireland. Ireland's both GDPR as well as PCI compliant. So from a POPIA definition, it is a suitable country of residence. There are, however, additional regulations like phase that prevents certain organizations from having the data outside of the borders of South Africa. In those cases, we have an instance of Corby hosted on AWS in Cape Town. And for our Australian clients, we've also got AWS in Sydney. Australia has very similar regulation to what we have from a data residency perspective. Expansion plans, obviously from a language perspective, we support Australian English as well. We're currently looking at developing with a pilot client, UK language pack, as well as we're looking at Dutch as our next language that we support as well. And then obviously for the same reason, we would be hosted out of Ireland because that's part of the EU. From an African perspective, the second part of your question, there are no current plans to support additional African languages at this point. And the reason why I say at this point is Kenya is of interest, so Swahili might be of interest, but it is a function, and the reality is, you know, what does it cost us to develop the language model versus what is the expected return? At our price point, we need a market of about 5,000 to 10,000 agents as a potential market to be able to validate that return.
That sounds exciting, Corey. And I think, yeah, from a governance perspective, I think it will also satisfy the auditors or management, you know, in terms of getting that assurances in terms of your hosting partners. So yeah, that's a great response. Thank you.
Ben, so Janet, I want to interject you. There's an interesting twist on the tail. From a regulator perspective, and I'm waiting to see when it comes, is remember the regulator is saying, how do you do your POPIA and some of your compliance checks on the calls? And it's, you know, you have a random paper-based human ear listening part. I'm waiting for one of our clients to go to the regulator and say, right, here's my list of questions that I interrogate every call from, and that is my accuracy rate, and do you accept that as validation? Because they do that in the UK. Ofcom, which is a credit regulator, will insist on debt collectors in the UK using speech analytics, and then they audit what are the questions what are the queries that you're running on your calls, and what is your accuracy rate. So they then get a feel for how well are you doing this across every call, rather than how well are you doing this across 5% of your calls, because there's just too many unknowns when you sample.
Exactly.
It's actually a great point, Corey, because I think from a POPE perspective, there is that attribute of quality. So from that, you actually then starting generating evidence. If you maybe do get a inquiry from inquiry, you say, this is my level of accuracy with my organization, and this is how I fulfill that obligation.
Absolutely, and these are all of the measures that I am monitoring from a quality perspective, and it's quantifiable.
I see there's some great networking happening at the same time here. This is fantastic. Mark and Rod. Okay, so we've literally only got 3 minutes left. I want to just close off and just say thank you very, very much for those of you who have made the time to attend. And I hope we've been able to really share some thought leadership with you, get the minds thinking. If there's any questions, please, Nolene has put our LinkedIn profiles in there. Also, my details are here at the end. Nolene, I think we'll be sending a copy of the presentation and this recording out. I think that'll be made available as well. I hope it is, as per our discussion. So I think I'd like to wrap up and just say thank you all for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was great catching up with you, Janet and Corey. Wonderful session.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, and thank you, Rod, as well, for your great insights. And Corey, thank you too as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
And thank you to all the attendees, of course. Thank you so much. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do this. All right. Thank you.